Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fan fiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and Accio headphones, and let the magic begin. Chapter 10 of Greenlight by SereneMusafir. For the large sum of my life, I have faced resistance and choices and decisions made for me. I've willingly accepted them, choosing instead to place my secrets, desires, and wishes into this small box that I call my heart. For the truth that I harbor in the darkness is who can I tell? Who do I turn to? How do I say what I seek above all this world and its people can offer is Nor. Sophia Aljabar, 1915. What's the name of this boy who's made you cry again? Draco Malfoy, Hermione sniffed. Her mother frowned. I thought his name was Ron. No, that was the other time. I see, her mother said quietly. Hermione shook her head in frustration. I just don't understand why he said such hurtful things. I didn't even do anything to him, Mum. Sometimes, her mother reached over and wiped the tears on Hermione's cheek with her thumb. When someone is hurt, they hurt others. If they don't know love, they can't share it with others. I don't understand. Her mother paused. Do you know how much your dad and I love you? Hermione nodded, a tear streaking down her cheek. Do you love us? Hermione nodded again. Does anyone love Draco? Hermione scowled. He has a mom and dad too. But that doesn't mean he's loved, Hermione. Hermione tried to think, but if she was honest, other than what he said to her, Harry, and Ron, she hardly ever thought about him. She shook her head. I don't know. And doesn't that just break your heart? Her mother said gently, cupping Hermione's face in the softness of her palms. What could be worse than not knowing if you're loved? Hermione blinks into the darkness. Her body is anchored in her bed, and she can't seem to move her limbs. Every fiber of her skin is filled with lead, and her chest burns as if she's been holding her breath for hours underwater. Her eyes have adjusted in the time she's woken up from her dream, and she watches the swirls of the trees dance across the fabric of her tent. Dawn is somewhere on the horizon, and she should probably get up and start her day since she's already awake. But she can't move. There are too many thoughts in her head and too little energy to make sense of them all. You don't have to love him, her mother said. But can you be kind? Hermione had been so young then, but she nodded. She'd do anything her mother asked, even if she hadn't been able to understand why she had to be kind, just to receive kindness in return. Didn't know why it was Malfoy who was lacking goodness in his life when she was the one who was hurt by him. It made no sense to Hermione why she had to be the one who had to try. During Hogwarts and the war, it always felt as though she was constantly tripping and falling frantically, picking up pieces thrown into the ring when all she wanted to do was come out on the other side of the door with her friends by her side. She didn't even have to be happy at the end, she decided. If her friends were alive, if Harry was there with her at the end, it was enough of an incentive to try as hard as she had. What had Malfoy lost during those years? Why was Malfoy deserving of kindness, of love? And what had hurt him so much that hurting others was more reflexive than opening himself up to kindness that she had tried to give him now? It hadn't been easy for her to do so, to give him something of herself when she knew he could easily use it to turn it against her. And she didn't want to hear that regardless of them being a world away from all the things that could have normally held them down, the expectations of how they were supposed to act around each other, he still didn't want anything to do with her. That there was a possibility that had nothing to do with what had happened before and everything to do with who she was as a person. Hermione frowns. She doesn't want to think about him. So she thinks about John and wonders if he misses her. She hasn't thought of him much during this trip, and suddenly the guilt is there, eating away at her ribs. But, she reasons, if she's thinking about him now, that has to mean she's missing him, right? It doesn't help anyway, and the guilt only worsens, so she starts to think about the little inscriptions and scrawls she's seen in Sophia's diary and wonders if they mean anything. Haphazardly writing in the corners of the pages or at the end of certain entries, the writing looks Arabic, but it's not in a recognizable script and can't be compared to the language. She's already shown it around with others who might recognize it and hasn't gotten any conclusion of what they might mean from anyone. Amina had just assumed the writing was just a part of Sophia doodling and writing out her thoughts. But Hermione can't help but wonder why no one has inquired about the scripts before, and it chillingly reminds her of Snape and his book. She's back to wishing she had a library or a bookstore or someone she could bounce off her thoughts about the diary. There's still one person she has yet to ask, of course, but now she's thinking about him again, so Hermione quickly reorients herself and thinks about Harry and wonders how he's doing. She hopes he's not angry about her leaving without saying anything and that he's gotten his appetite again, but the truth is she's not really thinking about anything except using it to disassociate from the one thing her mind really wants to revolve around. So nothing really registers and she's left with a sunken feeling after all of it. God, she's just so tired. She's tired to her marrow, feels the ache of exhaustion in the brittle synapses in her body. Hermione lets out a shaky breath and with great strength turns to her side, clutching her blanket close to her chest. Can you be kind, recklessly, my love? She squeezes her eyes shut, wincing at the pain that comes with the deep pressure building up behind her eyes. I tried, Mum, she whispers as fatigue pulls her back into sleep. I really did. They arrive in Serene at nightfall. Over Crescent peeks out of dusty dark clouds as cars amble through an unpaved rocky pathway, guiding them between looming mountains. A cool mountain breeze welcomes them to the small house situated between towering trees that they'll be staying at. Hermione follows the rest of the crew out of the car, stretching her arms above her head as she's turned around where she's standing. She's grateful that they'll briefly be staying at a proper lodge after the days they've spent in tents and in cars. While not necessarily tired of seeing the same people every day, she's looking forward to walking through the town with shops and a new set of faces belonging to unbothered people carrying out their daily lives. Further away between the trees, there's a rumbling and a crashing, and Hermione turns toward the sound. It's the ocean, Amina says, coming up behind her. She points in a direction north of the cottage. Past the trees, there's a cliff that outlooks onto the beach. But steer away from there since it's not fenced off. If you want to get down to the beach, it's less than 5 minutes walk down a boardwalk to the east here. Does it always get this loud? Not usually. There's a storm coming, I think, which makes the ocean a little louder than normal. Amina searches her face and gently touches Hermione's elbow. Hey, is everything all right? Hermione's sure that Amina must have figured out something was off with her and Malfoy, especially since they weren't traveling together anymore. If the others noticed as well, they hadn't said anything. Either way, she's determined not to spread her low mood around or give Amina another reason to make Malfoy go home. Yes, of course, Hermione smiles, turning towards her car to levitate the luggage off. Just tired, that's all. Hermione glances to her right when the headlights of a car reflect off a head of white hair before it disappears inside the cottage. She swallows thickly. Are we all staying inside? There are 3 rooms upstairs, each with their own small washroom, plus a sitting room with 2 sofa beds. The rest of us can stay in the tents outside. I can stay outside, she offers, forcing her gaze away from where Malfoy disappeared inside and to Amina. Tony and some of the other men have already requested tents. They stay up late outside anyways, so it works for them, Amina explains. Lena's legs have been hurting from the long rides and wants to stay on the main floor so that she doesn't have to climb the stairs. I offered to stay with her in the living room since she gets a little scared by herself, so a room upstairs is yours if you're up for it. Upstairs, with Malfoy it seems. Hermione nods slowly and follows Amina into the cottage, luggage hovering close behind her head. It belonged to my great-aunt, Amina says, leading her in. She was a muggle born from Vancouver, Canada. She lived near the coast, so when she married into my family, she had a cottage set up near the ocean. They pass a small white kitchen that's separated by a blue-tiled wall from where the sitting room is located. Hermione peers inside, noticing right away what's off about the cottage. Apparently, she can never let go of some of her muggle habits. Amina flips the switch and the kitchen lights up bright to show a stovetop. She liked to cook by hand, and every summer when my family came to visit, she'd make me and my cousins help her with the vegetables by making us use the knives without any magic. You can imagine all the trouble that caused us. Hermione smiles and follows Amina back out. She also has a habit of sometimes falling into a muggle routine, unconsciously washing dishes or making dinner by hand. Her home is filled with little muggle trinkets and tools that she just couldn't let go of, despite John's dismay. He didn't understand her need to hold on to a part of her life when she was so deep in the magical society, often saying it was regressive of her to do so. She didn't know how to explain that brushing her teeth with toothpaste or writing out a manuscript with a pen was how she kept the memories alive. Amina leads her past the sitting room, which opens directly up to a set of wooden stairs. Each step creaks heavily under their weight. "Are you going to sleep okay with all the noise the staircase will cause?" Hermione asks. She gingerly walks up the steps, afraid the sound will summon someone she doesn't want to particularly see tonight. "It won't be a problem. I used to sleep on the floor with my sister and my cousins, and the entire room was boarded off because we'd make so much noise." Upstairs, a dark hallway is lit by a single dim light in the middle of the ceiling. "Dinner will be sent to your room as soon as everyone's settled down." Amina points Hermione to the second room near the stairs. That one is yours. Let me know if you need anything, all right? I should be up for another hour or so." Her luggage falls silently beside her, and Hermione watches as Amina goes back down. She's about to open the door to the bedroom when another knob turning at the end of the hallway stops her. She holds her breath when a familiar blonde comes out of the room, ducking his head under the entrance so as not to hit the top. As if sensing her standing there, Malfoy pauses outside his room. Head bent low, one hand firmly clenching the doorknob. There's a moment of tension where it looks like he might go back inside, but instead he turns his head slowly toward her, and a flash of silver in the darkness makes her still. It was a knee-jerk response to want to go to him after the fight, to try and figure out how to fix everything, to apologize first because that's what she did. She patched things up, sewed the rips back together, glued the cracks as if she never hurt in the first place. But he wasn't John, nor was he Harry, or one of her other friends. He'd made it clear that she didn't owe him the energy of ruminating over what she had done or how to make up for it. And while she had initially sat in her frustration and stubbornness to not give in first, she can't deny there's an absence left behind. But what's lost? His silent company? His conversations where he's hot and cold? Or his teasing where it feels as if he's got the world's greatest secret and only she can know? Whatever it is that's missing, she doesn't know how to find it again. But standing in this hallway, she realizes that indifference is nothing she hasn't dealt with before. That letting go is easier when there was never anything tangible to hold on to. So when he meets her eyes and a strange look passes over his face, some sort of hesitance in the furrow of his brows, in the tension in his stiff shoulders, it's Hermione who looks away first. She ducks inside, back against the door and chest heavy. She waits and listens for the footsteps that never come. They get up early and go into town. Hermione wakes up late and exhausted, having slept only 3 hours last night. Every creak of the stairs outside her door drove her insane until she took an additional sleeping draught and passed out. It was only the banging on her door, Amina calling to ask if she wanted to go into town with the rest of them, that had her springing back her blanket and rushing to get ready. Outside the cottage, she tucks the letter she'd written last night to each of her friends back home, updating them on her progress and the happenings of the trip so far into her beaded bag. It's a cool day, the mountains and trees providing the necessary shade against the blazing sun, and it's a pleasant change from the heat they've been having. In the daylight, she's better able to appreciate the scenery and the ocean-scented air. The trees create long, winding shadows across the dusty ground, letting in glimpses of sunny rays through cracks between branches and leaves. The ocean waves crashing against the rocks are quieter this morning, the songs of birds and insects taking over the slow slumber of the water. A car starts for everyone who wants to head out, and Hermione pauses at the door, peeking inside to see the driver and Amina in the front, and Dana and Lena in the back. Is this everyone? Draco went earlier this morning with Idris and Tony, Amina replies, pushing her sunglasses back against her hair. But other than that, it's just us. Something heavy sinks into the pit of her stomach as she climbs in beside Lena. Lena reaches into her bag and pulls out an apple that she gratefully takes, thanking her. It takes around 20 minutes to get into town, and the path there is scattered with mountains and trees. Hermione feels the sudden urge to try to memorize every arched tree, knowing she won't be seeing much of it when they get to the desert. She leans her head against the window, letting the sharp air whip against her skin and her hair away from her face. The town's main courtyard is walled off with rising, white stone, and the car enters through a large white arch. They park close to the entrance, and Hermione follows everyone on foot onto the gates and past the market. The path is paved with cobblestones of various gray and brown shades, each stone shining with its luster, is as though someone scrubbed them clean just that morning. This portion of the town reminds her of Hogsmeade during the holidays, and she feels a burning pang in her chest. She passes a group of 2 young girls and a boy crowded around a pastry stall. She's instantly brought back to some of the fondest memories and the pure, unadulterated happiness she'd feel as she walked through the Hogsmeade village, armed between her friends. If she closes her eyes, she can smell the warm, sugary tones of butterbeer, hear Seamus say something funny that has the whole group laughing, feel the snowflakes dust across her nose during the first snowfall of the season. The boys say something, and the young girls burst into laughter. Hermione looks away. Specialty shops and restaurants line the sides of the path, and she watches in awe as crowds chamber in and out of low-rising, white stone buildings. They pass a restaurant, and live music, unlike any she's ever heard before, drift through the open doors and windows. Cymbals and drums mixed with string music echo through the air, and Hermione's tempted to go inside just to see who's playing. Each building has a wooden door painted in a similar dark green hue, and wizards and witches gather around, some chatting, others hauling through the crowds with bags filled to the seams with fruits and vegetables. Little pots of water are placed at each door, and it's only when she sees slick and furry cats walk stealthily towards the pots that she realizes it's for the animals. Lena tugs Hermione's hand gently when she lags behind, and she quickens her pace to catch up. They duck past another white stone arch into a narrow alley. The stone pathway is replaced with pale red, white, and yellow tiles designed in patterns resembling flowers. The doors in the alley are all painted in a darker blue hue. They climb up a pair of concrete steps, and Amina finally stops outside of what looks like a post office. Hermione digs back into her bag and hands Amina her letters and waits outside, sitting on steps away from the bustle of the entrance. The stone wall in front of her hangs a large ornate rug in deep red and brown colors. A single wooden sign in what she recognizes as Arabic is at the entrance of a navy painted door. There's a crash of dishes behind Hermione's head, and she jolts at the sound. A ginger cat jumps down from the vase and lands beside her shoes. The cat is smaller and a lot less furry than Crookshanks, but her eyes prick with tears anyways as she remembers the feline who'd passed away 4 years ago. She runs her fingers through the cat's fur, causing it to arch its back and straighten its tail. Her heart clenches in a fist, and she has to physically put her other palm against her chest to find relief as the cat makes its way between Hermione's legs before settling near her left foot. Her nose itches, and she bites the inside of her lips to prevent herself from crying. It's not home that the cat reminds her of, but more of a feeling she used to have when she was around Crookshanks. She runs her fingers behind the cat's ears and thinks how she never was truly alone when she'd come home to Crookshanks. But it's the pain she feels being around this cat now that reminds her why she never got another. Despite how lonely she feels most of the time, sometimes the memories were too heavy, too devastating that they couldn't be replaced by newer ones. She quickly sniffs and wipes the under of her eyes dry when she hears Amina's voice coming out of the post office. With a final stroke of the cat, she makes her way towards them. All the letters should be in there. Amina hands her a light parcel. She peeks inside to see only a handful of envelopes. For the second time that day, she feels a pit in her stomach as she takes out the letters and goes through the names. She hands 2 over to Lena and Amina, her heart thumping loudly with each passing letter not addressed to her. She doesn't fail to notice there aren't any with Malfoy on the front either, and for a second she thinks that maybe everyone forgot about her back home. But then, with great relief, the last letter has her name scribbled in the front in Ginny's recognizable, scrawly handwriting. A surge of love for her friend floods her. Hermione hands over the rest to Amina. They head back to the house. Hermione clutches the letter tightly in both of her hands, eagerly waiting to sit down somewhere calmly and comfortably before digging in. Despite the rare times she sees her friends now and just how much everyone has changed, she utterly misses them. And it's a sort of yearning she feels in all the places in her body she's kept them, her bones, her chest, the blood in her veins. She makes it to the outside of the house before she claws open the letter. She sits down by herself in one of the chairs near the tents outside, her heart beating with excitement. It's just one letter, and though it's just Ginny who's written to her, she finds herself looking into the envelope for letters from Harry and Ron. Instead, she finds a parchment crisply folded into a square. She reads the letter first. It takes a while for her to read the messy words, but her eyes, practiced from when Hermione used to edit Ginny's Hogwarts essays, eventually are able to comprehend the letter's contents. It's a brief letter, just one side of the parchment, but Ginny manages to inquire after Hermione and talk about her recent Quidditch game and how everyone else is doing within the parchment's bounds. She finishes the letter with her name and a strange P.S. I just thought you should know. Puzzled, Hermione carefully sets aside Ginny's letter and opens the folded parchment. Frozen to her seat, she stares at the cutout of the Daily Prophet. There's a looped black and white photo of John walking into Francesca and Canton, a private Italian restaurant he'd sometimes take Hermione to after a fight, or if he needed a particular favor from her. Her eyes glaze over his walking figure and switch over to a woman with pale hair that he has his arms wrapped around. Above the photo, in bold black letters, it states, "From golden girl to golden woman, John Archibald is living in a golden world." She squints closely at the woman's back, looking for some clue to determine who she is. She can't recognize the woman. She doesn't really know what it means for her to be called a golden woman, other than maybe she has golden hair. Ginny only sent her the photo and not the associated article, and Hermione knows why. She can just imagine all the obscene things Skeeter would have to say about the situation, about what it means for Hermione despite her not even being in the country. She should have known she wouldn't have been able to escape the tabloids. This should cover the gossip for the next week or so. Hermione waits. Her mind is blank, the paper trembling slightly in her fingers. She tries to put her thoughts into something coherent and make sense of this entire ordeal. She's always treated her feelings and emotions as complicated arithmetic formulas. The only way she can make sense of something so intangible and abstract. She pulls them apart into the simplest components, rearranges them into comparable subtypes, and then finally takes a step back to figure out the overarching feeling. She decides that she's not shocked. She'd known they were taking a break when she left. John had told her exactly that. There wasn't to be anything left of them when she came back home. She'd left home with that thought in mind, and it was okay with the idea for a reason. She needed a break from him, something for herself for once. And at the time, it meant leaving and figuring out the consequences of taking a break from John when the time came. That's how it's always been for Hermione. Think about everything, focus on one task at a time, and then deal with the consequences as they come. And because she'd left for herself, she'd expected John to be equally selfish during their time apart. They were taking a break, and that meant there was a door left open for when she returned. Sure, she hadn't expected him to move on to someone new when he'd mentioned just how busy he was with his schedules and press interviews, but she finds that she'll be okay with it if this is the route he wants to take. She's also not heartbroken, and it takes a bit longer to process why. She's never felt heartbreak over love, and she suspects that's because she doesn't really know how it might feel considering the limited opportunities in her life for it to happen. She might be wrong right now. Even when she'd ended it with Ron, she hadn't felt the devastating feeling everyone claimed after a breakup. However, she has felt heartbreak over non-romantic love before. She felt heartbroken when she obliviated her parents and had to walk away. Felt it when Harry met her and Ron one last time before heading to the forest that night to see Voldemort. She felt the earth-shattering pain in her chest both of those times. But since she doesn't feel any of it now, as she thought was supposed to happen, she concludes that perhaps she was never in love with John. And it's not a revelation, that's for sure. She'd been with John with the possibility that one day she'd fall in love with him. So why does she feel so empty? The kind of emptiness that makes her heart feel completely hollow when she has to look down at her chest to see whether she's been carved out. The kind that isn't really the absence of a feeling, but more of a heavy nothingness. She suspects it's because she lost something once again, and she is just so sick and tired of losing things in her life. Tired of not feeling shocked by something that others might feel betrayed over because it means this thing she spent months nurturing was never as precious or worthwhile as she thought it was. She might not have been in love with John, but she's disappointed that she never got the chance to feel it at all. What must it be that makes you like this? She doesn't know. She'd be cold if she could. She'd remove the burden of feeling anything, just so she doesn't have to feel everything, especially when she's breaking apart at the seams. Especially when it takes one article about her to completely unravel. She'd do anything to give it all away, be anyone else if she could. And it's the new sadness mixed with her missing her friends and Crookshanks that causes the silent, hot tears to finally erupt and cascade down her cheeks. Her hands shake, and she palms her face with both of her hands to stop them from doing so. She tries to breathe, but it comes out choppy and choked, and she finds herself gasping for air. It's only when the front door opens and she hears Tony's booming laugh that she jolts straight, rapidly wiping her cheeks. She hurries when his voice resounds around her, and she mumbles an excuse as she pushes past Tony. She tilts her head low, hoping no one can see her tear-streaked, flushed face. She rushes up the creaking stairs only to bump into something solid at the top. She thinks maybe it's a wall, stumbling one step down and barely catching herself with the railing. But then she hears a familiar, rough voice and thinks the day can't get any worse. What the hell, Granger? Malfoy grunts, flattening himself against the wall as if to get as far away as possible from her. She ducks her head even lower, letting her hair cover her face, and mumbles an apology. But it comes out nasally and muffled, sounding exactly like someone who's been crying, and she can't think of another way of humiliating herself in front of Malfoy. She feels him turn around behind her as she goes into her room. Granger! Hermione shuts the door. She scrubs her face, nails clawing at the sensitive skin around her eyes. She reaches into the drawer beside her bed and takes out a sleeping bag. One sip, then two, then three. She lays back on the bed, her legs dancing off the sides so that her shoes touch the wood-paneled floor, waits for the potion to work. She picks at the cut around her thumb, her eyes fixated on the ceiling. The corners of her vision start to blur. Faint pain around her skin causes a quiet hiss to escape her lips, but her eyes are already too heavy for her to do anything about it. She falls asleep to the sound of the stairs creaking outside her door. There's someone knocking on her door, and the first ridiculous thought that passes Hermione's groggy mind is that it's Malfoy. For no reason, she always thinks it's him. She's about to yell at him to go away when Lena's voice filters through. Hermione? Lena asks, her voice muffled through the door. Darling, are you all right? Hermione fumbles to get her tangled body off the bed and sits up, running a weighted hand down her face. Another knock on her door causes her to rush to open the door. Lena is standing there holding a tray with covered dishes. The spicy aroma hits her before she can say anything, and her stomach grumbles. Lena smiles at the sound and brings the tray closer. You missed lunch. She smiles gratefully at Lena and opens the door wide to let her inside. Thank you, I'm starving. She waves her wand and slides a single wicker chair in the room close to the bed for Lena. She kicks off her shoes before climbing into the bed. A comfortable silence takes over the room as Hermione uncovers the dishes and takes a bite of rice. She can't help but moan at the flavors exploding in her mouth. Lena laughs. My daughter would do the same thing whenever I'd make this for her. I'd always look out for it to know if I've done a good job with my cooking. It's delicious, thank you, Hermione mumbles, reaching for a second bite before she even swallows the one in her mouth. You have a daughter? Lena nods, a wistful look in her eyes. Her name is Mona. She used to live with me in Cairo, but for the last 10 years she's been in Sweden with her father. She's getting married in 4 months to this very beautiful, very tall man. Her fiancé's a healer at one of the bigger hospitals there. She's getting married in 4 months to this very beautiful, very tall man. Her fiancé's a healer at one of the bigger hospitals there, just like my Mona. The pride she hears in Lena's voice makes her throat burn. You must be excited about the wedding. I won't be there. Lena looks down at her hands and sighs. I don't think she wants me there. Did she invite you? Hermione asks gently. Lena's eyes drift to Hermione's window. She did. She sent me a card a year ago when he first proposed. She said she wanted to tell me first so I could prepare myself, since I am always away from home. But you won't go? She shakes her head and her face twists into distraught. I'm I'm ashamed. There's really no other word for it. Too much has happened, and I never apologized to her. I worry if I see her in person, I'll be reminded about how I failed her. It's selfish, I know. I don't want to go, so I won't have to deal with the reminder that she'll never truly forgive me. Hermione reaches out to hold the older witch's hand. I'm sure that's not true, Lena. It's always difficult for women, Lena continues. We always have to be the one to make the difficult choices. First to be a wife, then to be a mother. I always knew there will be times when I'll have to put myself aside for the sake of others. But then the time came, and I was faced with the possibility of never doing the things I loved. I felt like I was going to die. So I chose my career, my freedom in traveling the world. I chose the opportunity to explore new places and meet new people over being there for my daughter. You chose to be happy. Lena nods. I chose to be happy. And it's guilt I'll always carry with me, but at least I know there is no one to blame for this burden other than myself. The alternative would have been to live a life where I was miserable and only blamed others for it, and I can't imagine Mona would have been happy then, too. Lena shakes her head fervently, as if to snap herself out of it. But enough of my tired stories. How has your research been going? Hermione groans. I've been stuck on this thing for so long. Actually, now that I have you read Sophia's diary? I haven't, no. I usually don't dabble into those things since I mostly help with the mapping and data recording of the trek. Hermione reaches into the drawer beside her bed where she keeps the diary. There's this thing I've noticed in her diary, and I was wondering if you could have a look and let me know what you think. She flips to the recent entries she'd been reading, and Lena sits down beside her to peer down to where she points. After the accident, where Sophia lost half of her crew, she flips between using the word Alnor and Nor. I know Alnor means the light, so all the time she's used the word, I've assumed she meant the Cave of Light, Kafi Alnor, or light in the context of enlightenment. But the diary entries after the accident occasionally mention the word Nor. She hands the diary to Lena and flips the pages to one near the end. From here on, Sophia has returned home from Russia from the trip, but she's exclusively uses the word Nor. Not once does she say Kahif al-Nor or just al-Nor. Lena contemplates it, reading the entry. Sometimes someone can be named Nor. So you think that maybe she's referring to someone? Or it might just be how she refers to the cave, Lena suggests, handing the diary back. You know what she was looking for was the Kahif al-Nor. So really, in the end, it all means the same thing. I just feel like we keep missing something, and it's entirely obvious if I could just read between the lines. We've been right on track and scheduled thus far. If there's something not right, I'm sure it'll all come together for you. There it is again, another person added to the list of those who think Hermione can figure it all out. An itch starts on her body, and she sets the journal aside. What is it, darling? There's warmth in Lena's brown eyes, and it makes Hermione want to crawl into them and sleep forever. Hermione shakes her head. Nothing. Lena reaches over and pushes back a curl with aching gentleness. You're upset about something. I can see it on your face. She suspects her face must be puffy and red, her eyes swollen from crying and sleeping. She bites the inside of her lip hard and then shakes her head again. I think I'm just homesick today. Lena's fingers slide from her temple and down her face to cup Hermione's chin. Is it your parents you miss? I do miss them. Every day, she exhales, a loose breath. I miss them so much that sometimes I feel like I spend more years of my life just missing them than the ones I've spent with them. Hermione's shoulders tremble and she wipes her cheek, surprised to find them wet. She knew of the consequences when she obliviated her parents, the possibility of them never getting their memories of her back the longer they'd been without them. She just never realized how haunted she'd be by the same memories she'd stolen. She rubs her knuckles against her thighs and looks up at Lena's softened face. But I also miss home, and I don't know what that means. I've spent more time on the road than I have been at home, and yet the feeling of homesickness never goes away. Lena runs her thumbs under both of Hermione's eyes. But I've learned the homes we miss are never really about the places we stay. It's always the memories and the feeling of belonging that we attach to the places, and it's people that we miss the most when we think of home. Does it ever get easy? Hermione whispers. Lena holds Hermione's face delicately in the palms of her hands. Sometimes we find new people and make enough new memories that for a moment we forget the yearning we feel every day. When Lena runs a loving hand through her curls and makes her way to get up, Hermione stops her with a hand on the wrist. If it was the other way around, Hermione says carefully, if your daughter had been the one to leave you, would you forgive her? Her heart thumps against her ribcage as she watches Lena's face, feeling as though she's on the precipice of some sort, and it's only her answer to this question that will determine if she'll fall. Lena doesn't hesitate in her response. Her voice is firm and conclusive. Of course, she could never do anything that wasn't worth forgiveness from me. Hermione nods. She wants to weep. Instead, she meets Lena's eyes. Then you should go to her wedding, Lena, because she's already forgiven you and she just wants to see her mother. Hermione spends the rest of her evening in the bedroom going over some personal and ministry work. Eventually night falls and the heaviness in her chest lessens enough that she's able to join everyone else around the fire outside. She heads to the washroom to wipe down her face. A sunken face stares back at her in the mirror, a face that belongs to a strange girl. No, not a girl. She's a woman now. But she can't recognize who this face belongs to because it surely can't be hers. Hermione stares at the mirror, her heart racing at the thought that she doesn't know who she's become. Her cheeks are red, her eyes puffy and swollen, dark shadows rest under her eyes. Who is this person? A trembling finger reaches out to touch the glass and she inhales sharply despite the tightness winding across her ribs. Her father's eyes, she realizes. She knows the eyes because they belong to her father. The same eyes she'd look into whenever he talked to her. Another sharp inhale. She recognizes her hair too, layers and layers of brown curls that belong to her mother. Faint freckles that reappeared with time in the sun scattered across the bridge of her nose. Those belong to no one but her. Hermione steps back. Her heart starts to slow down enough until breathing doesn't strain her lungs. She glamours the tiredness from her face, takes her beaded bag, and leaves the room. Outside, cold wind blows across the circle and the fire roars to life, sending explosive orange sparks flying everywhere. The trees sway against the wind, and the silver moon and the scattered stars shine bright as a guiding light amongst the darkness. She snuggles into a chair beside Amina, who wraps an extra shawl around Hermione's shoulders. Hermione digs into her bag when her hand stumbles upon the necklace she bought from the market. She thumbs the intricate pattern on the wooden pendant. Her forefinger slides to the sides and across the surface, looking for the pull that opened the necklace. She turns it to its side until she finally finds the little notch that she pushes to the right, and the necklace snaps open. Immediately, the scent of roses overcomes her. She blinks in surprise at the aroma and looks down to see dried rose petals crushed into a carved necklace. She gently touches the petals, and it's as though she's back in the hotel courtyard, Malfoy standing tall in all black. Voices from the door of the house cause her to look up, and her eyes lock harshly with Malfoy's. He wavers as he gets close to the fire pit, his eyes searching Hermione's face as though looking for a sign of something. Hermione averts her own gaze back to the necklace and gently closes the clasp. She hesitates for a moment, but then puts the necklace on, pulling her hair out from the back. It lies warmly against her cool skin. The smell of roses remains as though she doused her entire body with perfume, and she scratches her neck to stop herself from looking back at Malfoy. Her mind tries to keep up with the conversations, and she grasps bits of what Tony is saying. He suggests that they do it the Muggle way and spin the bottle so that whoever it points to can choose an act to perform for the night's entertainment. It seems everyone is running out of things to do. The first spin lands on Lena, who after much coaxing gives a reciting poem in Arabic. Lena's soft voice enunciates each syllable of the words unknown to Hermione, and though she has no clue what the poem is about, she still feels the longing in the words. Everyone claps when Lena bashfully sits back down and the bottle is spun once more. It stops spinning, pointing at Hermione, and she cringes internally. She reaches for her bag. Should I read another story from the book? How about an original? Tony asks, grinning. Oh, I don't. Come on, Hermione, we won't bite unless you ask, of course, Tony exclaims, waggling his dark eyebrows at her. She meets Tony's challenging eyes and stands up, pulling the shawl tighter around her. All right, I'll see what I can do. Hermione shifts where she stands. She risks a look at Malfoy from the corner of her eyes. He sits still, staring deep into the fire, making no move to look at her. Good, she thinks. The more disinterested he is in her, the better. But her traitorous breath hitches as she watches the shadows from the fire flash across his face. firelight reflecting off his pale hair. Despite the coolness of the night, he's sitting in his all-black attire with no added layers for warmth. Smoke twirls into the air, curving around the dancing shadows of the fire. And for the second time during this trip, she's struck by how handsome he looks, which is most inconvenient because she does not want to think about how good he looks. She drags herself away from him and faces the fire as well. She pauses to think a moment and clears her throat and then begins. A long time ago. Here we go, Tony teases, laughing as he takes a swig from a bottle. Lena shushes him, taking the bottle away from his hands and passing it to Idris. There lived a rich man who proclaimed himself to be a connoisseur of all things fine and beautiful. A critic of few words and even fewer emotions, he was approached by the villagers for his opinion about what he perceived to be adequate and what he deemed as simply unrefined. One day, rumors about a great world wonder miraculously appearing thousands of miles away reached the man. It was said that travelers who stumbled upon the shrine would fall to their knees in reverence and sorrow, for it was decreed that they'd never find anything as beautiful and as inspiring as the shrine ever in their lives again. A cold breeze whispers against Hermione's temples, and she shivers, pulling the shawl tighter. She looks away from the fire and to those gathered around. She's taken aback by the keen interest in the story she sees on their faces. Lena nods at her to continue. The cynical man did not believe others had the ability to make that judgment, so he decided to go on the quest to proclaim whether the shrine really was, as they said. The man traveled for 100 days, determined not to return until he found the shrine and saw for himself the thing that turned others into endless grief. He traveled through dozens of villages, scaled tall mountains, and sailed through large bodies of water until one night he finally reached the mountain behind which the shrine stood. Her eyes stop at Malfoy, who hasn't moved a single muscle or looked up from the fire. Maybe he feels her looking at him then, because in her pause, Malfoy slowly lifts his head up and meets her gaze. The deep intensity in his eyes makes her stumble, and she blinks into surprise at the sheer defiance she sees in them. His brow furrows and his lips part slightly, as though he is too taken aback by what he sees in her. She tries to look away, but her body has grown roots into the dirt beneath her, reaching toward him from all directions. By now the man was exhausted to his bones, brimming with anger. He truly did not believe that the time and effort he'd put to see this shrine was worth its declared beauty. Her voice is quiet and odd, even in her ears. Her heart hammers, and Hermione nervously tucks a curl away from her face and behind her ear. She swallows the thickness in her throat, her eyes drop to her neck, and the gray disappears into black. So ready to end the quest and make his judgment, the man scaled the final mountain and looked ahead. There, under the moonlight, stood the world wonder, as others claimed. She finds that she simply cannot look away from Malfoy, does not want to look away, and she wonders if he feels it too. The delicate taut string between them, threatening to snap and drag both of them down. If he felt the absence as she had in the days past, and how it's all coming back now that they're looking at each other. And when the man lay his eyes on the shrine in all its clarity, Hermione continues, wondering also if he realizes the way he's looking at her now defies everything he told her before. That she sees right through him, just as he claimed he saw through her. She lifts her chin and meets his glazed eyes steadily. He fell to his knees and trembled. Silence, except for the light roaring of the wind and the crackles of the fire, takes over the group. Hermione can't move, isn't sure if she's even breathing as she continues to look back at Malfoy. It isn't until cheers erupt around her and Malfoy jolts at the sound, looking away, that she's shaken into movement and collapses back into her chair. She feels drunk, sitting in her chair, vaguely aware of the bottle spinning again and stopping at Tony. She cradles her trembling hands in her lap and doesn't dare look up, afraid of what she might see, of the unspoken thing that's happened. Until suddenly, she's yanked up by her wrist and into Tony. She gives a surprised laugh and twirls, singing in a slurred, booming voice, "That's a more!" He spins in a circle, and she can't help the laughter bubbling out of her. He lets go of her hands to bring Amina to her feet, who takes the other hand. Hermione turns around despite herself to catch Malfoy's eyes. She stumbles to stop when she doesn't see him sitting in his spot. She twists and watches his shadow disappear inside the house. Before she can even think about what's happened, Amina takes her in her arms once more, and they resume the dance to Tony's atrocious singing. All right, friends, that was chapter 10. What do we think? A little angsty angst going on there. So excited to get into the next few chapters. I will see you in the next one.